These 7 awful speech habits are hindering you from being taken seriously at work. The first bad habit is you're speaking in terms of features, and the fix is to speak in terms of benefits. This basically means that you're saying the what before the why. Let's say that you're a ticket sales rep for an NBA basketball team like the Atlanta Hawks. Well, you're not selling a season ticket pass, but rather you're selling camaraderie, community with the Hawks fans, connection with the players, and an escape from their day jobs. Core benefits: saving time, saving money, finding entertainment. I want you to spot exactly how NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang does this when he's asked what his company does.
Well, we are a technology company that processes software. And so because of what we do, we can make what is barely possible, or we can make something that is very energy consuming, very energy efficient, or we could turn something that costs a lot of money and make it much more affordable.
Right, throughout that entire monologue, Jensen didn't even say what his company did until the very end.
And so we created this thing called accelerated computing. And that was what we pioneered about 3 decades ago. And it's taken until now to really take off.
He started with why it mattered. What were the main benefits for his customers that they ultimately cared about? And the rule of thumb here is that he's actually speaking in 5th grade language. This is important because you need to rally your customers, the press, your executives, manager, your team, and that can only be done if you're speaking at a level that anyone can understand. The second bad speech habit you need to kill is you speak too fast when you're nervous. And the fix to that is slow down your speech. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's obvious, I need to slow down, but how do I actually go about slowing down my speech, particularly when I'm nervous? There are 3 methods that I've used to practice this. The first is before you answer, pause for 3 full seconds. Even if you know exactly what you want to say, get in the habit of pausing, because when you actually start speaking, you'll naturally slow down. The second tip is to repeat yourself, specifically when you say something that you really want the other person to remember. And this is exactly what Jensen does.
For applications and domains of science that are barely possible without us. And so because of what we do, we can make what is barely possible.
Repetition is the best aid to memory. So I want you to get it out of your mind that repeating yourself is actually something that people get annoyed by. Because frankly, if you repeat yourself, they're more likely to thank you instead. And the third technique I like to use is what I call the chopper technique. This is when you have a particular sentence that you want to say, but you break it up by pausing, by inserting breaths. It may not come as naturally, so what I like to do is read any article online and practice reading it aloud. When you're reading, make sure to insert pauses more frequently than you're used to. When you speak too fast, you're coming off as actually unsure of yourself, like you just want to get through everything as quickly as possible so people won't probe at what you're saying. But when you speak slowly, what you're indicating is that people can absolutely probe because you're fully confident in every word that you say. The third awful speech habit is that you tend to ramble when you're asked a difficult question. And the fix is bluff, or bottom line up front. See exactly how the CTO of OpenAI, Mira Murati, does this beautifully.
Can someone guide the technology to negative outcomes?
The answer is yes, you could guide it to negative outcomes, and this is why we make it available initially in very constrained ways. So we can learn what are these negative outcomes, what are the ways in which technology could be harmful. If you ask a question to GPT-4, can you help me make a bomb? It is much less likely to follow that guidance versus the previous systems. And so we're able to intervene at the pre-training stage to make these models more likely to refuse direction or guidance that could be harmful.
Let's examine Mira's answer. When she's asked that question, she immediately answers the question by saying, yes, there are problems. And you really want to do this because now you're building trust. You're showing that you don't need to evade a tough question. Furthermore, she does a really helpful tactic, which I call the yes and. Instead of contradicting the difficult question, she merely adds to it by saying, yes, it's fully acknowledged. And here's exactly how we're going about approaching the problem.
The answer is yes, you could guide it to negative outcomes. And this is why we make it available initially in very constrained ways.
You're not contradicting what the other person is saying, you're merely expanding upon what they're saying. So they're much more likely to be receptive. The fourth reason why you're not taken seriously when you speak is you speak with an uptone at the end of your sentence. I believe we should do this. Instead, I believe we should do this. When you remove the upswing at the end of your sentence, you now sound way more convinced and confident. The fifth bad speech habit that prevents people from taking you seriously is you don't share your opinion. Remember, if you're a leader in an organization, people are paying you to give your opinion, but the way you need to do it is particularly important, and specifically, be opinionated, but approach it from multiple perspectives. I want you to watch specifically how the former CEO of PepsiCo, Indra Nooyi, does this right here.
So how do you balance this short-term demand for you to deliver versus the long-term vision to take risk and make long-term change that are actually good for the business?
I think you've got to look at the investments you make in the company as a portfolio. There's a bunch of stuff that delivers in the short term, and that gives you the breathing room to invest in the long term.
Notice again how she's answering with the bottom line up front to take a portfolio approach.
I know what we need to invest in, constantly balancing projects that will deliver today, countries that will deliver today, which can then provide the ammunition for us to invest in long-term initiatives. You can't have too many long-term initiatives or too many short-term initiatives, because you don't want to spoil the investor with too many short-term invests. So this judicious balance is what we worry about all the time.
And she articulates the inverse of that, which is if you were to not take a portfolio approach and instead over-index on small bets or long-term bets, you're ultimately doing your board a disservice. One technique that I really like to use is to use the anchoring effect. The anchoring effect is when you can tie your opinion to a universal truth that everyone would have to understand. An example of this is, let's say that you want to propose taking your product roadmap a certain direction. Well, you can articulate that by saying, we all have this company OKR, weekly active engagement. I believe that this route is the best path to reaching that number because this will give us a far greater user base than the other path. Now, when you articulate your response this particular manner, it's much harder for them to contradict it because you've tied it to an anchoring metric that everyone would support. The sixth bad speech habit is that you're not using your body language enough. And the fix to this is to use synchronizing gestures. This is exactly what Indra does here. She articulates different parts of her argument with her left hand, with her right hand, to show how they connect together. These speech tactics may not seem that important, but they're implicitly boosting her credibility because her body language reinforces the same message as her speech. Now, if she were to do the exact opposite thing where she might say connect, but actually diverge, that will contradict what she's saying, and people are less likely to believe her. What I've seen typically as a mistake is people, especially when they're taking video conference calls, they tend to just have their cameras showing half of their face or just above their neck. What I like to do is I like to show my torso and up and make sure that my hands are visible. That's really important because whenever you're communicating, you want to be able to show that, hey, whatever I'm saying, I truly believe because I'm gesturing exactly as I'm saying it. And the seventh awful speech habit that I've seen is you don't pause.
Do your tweets hurt the company? Are there Tesla owners who say, I don't agree with his political position because, and I know it because he shares so much of it? Or are there advertisers on Twitter that Linda Yaccarino will come and say, you got to stop, man. Or, I can't get these ads because of some of the things you tweet.
I'm reminded of the scene in The Princess Bride. Great movie.
Great.
Where he confronts the person who killed his father. And he says, offer me money. Offer me power. I don't care.
So you just don't care.
I'll say what I want to say, and If the consequence of that is losing money, so be it.
Now, I'm not saying you need to pause like Elon does for 10 seconds, but a minimum of 3 seconds is always helpful. Pausing does 3 important things. The first is that it slows you down, like we said. The second is that it buys you time to really think through an articulate answer. And the third is that it shows the other person that you actually are caring to think through exactly what they ask, making them feel really good about themselves in the conversation. So these are the 7 bad habits that you need to be aware of in your speech to make sure that you're taken seriously at work with customers, with your team, with executives. If you found this helpful, make sure to watch this speech breakdown of Deion Sanders right here to get a full masterclass on how to become a better communicator.